Over 1,000 tons of uranium. Gone. NATO says it was stolen. Niger says it was theirs all along. Russia just paid $300 million for it, allegedly. The World Bank issued orders. Niger ignored them. France demanded answers. Silence. Investigators were blocked at the border. And now Western capitals are realizing something they never prepared for. The rules they wrote, the courts they built, the entire legal system designed to control Africa's resources. None of it matters anymore. Because Niger just proved that defiance works. And if they can do it, who's next? This isn't a dispute. It's a revolution. A French mining company gets expelled from one of the poorest nations on Earth. Weeks later, NATO-aligned authorities claim tens of millions of dollars worth of uranium has vanished. They're pointing fingers at Russia. Niger's military government isn't backing down. What sounds like a corporate dispute is now a full-blown geopolitical standoff, and the stakes go far beyond one country's uranium stockpile. This is Niger, landlocked, resource-rich, and for decades, quietly feeding France's nuclear reactors. Orano, the state-backed French mining giant, operated here for over 50 years, extracting uranium that powered French cities while Niger remained one of the least electrified countries on the planet. That arrangement held until it didn't. In 2023, Niger's military seized power in a coup that wasn't just about domestic politics. It was a rejection of French influence, Western military presence, and the economic model that came with it. Orano was ordered out, and when they left something behind. Now NATO-linked authorities are calling it theft. Organized theft. The uranium that remained after Orano's departure, legally stockpiled, commercially unresolved, has allegedly disappeared. Western officials suggest it didn't just vanish. They're implying it was diverted, and they're naming a suspect, Russia. The narrative is clear. Niger's military junta, aligned with Moscow, sees the uranium as leverage or payment. It's a claim designed to do more than recover assets. It's designed to delegitimize Niger's sovereignty over its own resources. Niger's government isn't playing defense. They're reframing the entire conversation. The uranium, they argue, isn't stolen, it's compensation for decades of extraction that enriched France, while Niger's own population saw almost none of the economic benefit. This isn't about missing inventory. It's about who gets to define ownership when the rules were written by the colonizer. And Niger is making it clear, those rules no longer apply. The junta sees this uranium as a sovereign asset, a tangible piece of the wealth that was extracted under inequitable contracts. To them, NATO's accusations aren't legal, they're colonial. But this dispute isn't happening in a vacuum. Niger sits at the crossroads of the Sahel, a region where influence is being contested in real time. French troops have been pushed out. Russian Wagner-linked forces have moved in. The uranium question is a proxy for a much bigger battle. Who controls the resources, the security architecture, and the political future of Francophone Africa? For NATO, losing Niger means losing a critical piece of the Sahel security puzzle. For Russia, gaining influence in Niger means access, leverage, and a foothold in a region the West has long taken for granted. So what happens if Niger holds firm? If NATO escalates with sanctions, asset freezes, or political isolation, it risks pushing Niger deeper into the Russian orbit. If they back down, it sets a precedent. Post-colonial contracts can be challenged. Resource sovereignty can be reclaimed. Other countries are watching. Burkina Faso, Mali, even further afield. This uranium dispute could become a template for how developing nations renegotiate their relationships with former colonial powers. And what happens when the West tries to hold them accountable under frameworks they no longer recognize. In late November 2025, Niger's military government reportedly moved over 1,000 tons of uranium, defying direct orders from the World Bank and international arbitration courts. This wasn't a logistical error. It was a calculated act of defiance. And it's forcing a question the international community isn't prepared to answer. What happens when a sovereign state simply stops recognizing the legal frameworks designed to control it? This uranium didn't just appear. It's been sitting in Niger since the French mining giant Uranium was expelled following the 2023 military coup. For months, the dispute simmered in boardrooms and arbitration chambers. World Bank-affiliated bodies, backed by NATO-aligned legal institutions, ruled that Niger had no right to access or sell the stockpile. The expectation was clear: Niger would comply, wait for resolution, follow the process. But Niger didn't wait. And by moving that uranium, they didn't just violate a ruling, they rejected the entire system behind it. Ignoring a World Bank ruling is one thing. Physically relocating over 1,000 tons of disputed uranium is another. Reports suggest the shipment occurred quietly, without fanfare, and without international oversight. NATO-backed investigators have demanded access. They've been refused. The junta in Niamey has made it clear: external legal orders no longer dictate what Niger does with its own resources. This is more than a contract dispute. It's a declaration that the rules governing resource extraction in Africa, rules written largely by former colonial powers and enforced through international institutions, are no longer binding in Niger's eyes. So why does this matter beyond one shipment? Because the World Bank arbitration courts and NATO-aligned legal structures have functioned for decades as the enforcers of a global economic order. When disputes arise over resources, contracts, or sovereignty, these institutions settle them. Their authority has been largely unquestioned, especially in Africa, where economic dependency often meant legal compliance. But Niger just tested that authority and found it lacks teeth. If a military government can move $1 billion uranium stockpile in defiance of international rulings and face no immediate consequence, what precedent does that set? Niger isn't acting alone. Across the Sahel, a pattern is forming. Mali expelled French forces. Burkina Faso ended defense agreements with Paris. Guinea and Chad are renegotiating mining contracts. What ties these moves together isn't just anti-French sentiment. It's a rejection of the institutional frameworks that have governed Africa's relationship with the West since independence. These governments are betting that Russia and increasingly China offer an alternative model, one that doesn't come with legal oversight, governance conditions, or arbitration clauses. And Niger's uranium move suggests they're willing to burn bridges with the old order to make that bet. Here's where the tension becomes structural. If Niger can defy the World Bank and move strategic resources without consequence, other nations will notice. Not just in Africa, across the global south. Countries sitting on critical minerals, rare earth elements, and energy resources have watched this unfold. They've seen that defiance is possible, that international legal institutions, when politically isolated, have limited enforcement power. The question isn't whether Niger will face sanctions or isolation. It likely will. The question is whether that isolation will deter others, or whether it will accelerate the fracturing of the post-colonial economic system. Right now, over 1,000 tons of uranium are somewhere other than where the World Bank says they should be. Investigators can't access the site. Arbitration rulings can't compel compliance. And Niger's government shows no sign of reversing course. This isn't just about one country's defiance. It's about whether the international legal architecture that has governed resource extraction, trade, and sovereignty for decades can survive the deliberate rejection of nations that no longer see themselves as bound by its authority. And if it can't, what comes next isn't just uncertainty. It's a fundamentally different global order, one where power, not process, decides who controls what. That shift is already underway. The uranium was just the signal. Niger just allegedly sold over $300 million worth of uranium to Russia, not through back channels, not as a minor side deal, as a direct, calculated transaction that has NATO scrambling to contain the fallout. This isn't just about one shipment. It's about the reconfiguration of critical supply chains, the erosion of Western influence in Africa, and what happens when a resource-rich nation decides the old partnerships no longer serve its interests. Uranium isn't just a commodity. It's strategic infrastructure. It powers nuclear reactors, fuels energy grids, and sits at the heart of national security calculations across Europe. For decades, Niger's uranium fed French reactors, keeping the lights on in Paris, while Niger itself remained one of the least electrified nations on the continent. That arrangement was stable because it was controlled. Orano, the French state-backed mining giant, managed extraction. The uranium moved through Western supply chains. Moscow wasn't in the picture. But after Niger's military coup in 2023 and the expulsion of French forces, that control evaporated. And now, reportedly, Russia is the buyer. NATO-aligned governments aren't treating this as a commercial transaction. They're treating it as a geopolitical threat. The alleged sale to Russia for over $300 million confirms what Western intelligence has suspected for months. Moscow is building parallel supply chains in regions where the West is losing ground. If Niger's uranium is now flowing to Russia, it doesn't just weaken European energy security. It strengthens Moscow's position in a market the West has dominated since the Cold War. And it does so in a region, the Sahel, where France and its allies have spent billions trying to maintain influence through military presence, development aid, and security partnerships. All of that leverage is now in question. But from Niamey's perspective, this isn't betrayal. It's pragmatism. Niger's military-led government sees the uranium as a sovereign asset, and Russia as a partner willing to pay without the conditions, oversight, or legal entanglements that come with Western deals. There are no arbitration clauses with Moscow, no World Bank rulings, no demands for governance reforms or human rights benchmarks. Just cash on terms Niger controls. The junta is betting that the diplomatic and legal retaliation from NATO will be painful but survivable, and that the alternative, remaining locked into exploitative agreements with former colonial powers, is worse. This is where the stakes become clear. Niger is willing to accept isolation from the West if it means economic agency. The alleged uranium sale isn't happening in isolation. It's part of a larger realignment. Across Africa, critical minerals are being weaponized in geopolitical competition. Cobalt in the Democratic Republic of Congo, lithium in Zimbabwe, rare earths across the continent. China and Russia are positioning themselves as alternative buyers and partners, offering immediate capital without the political strings that come with Western investment. And as these deals multiply, NATO is realizing it's not just competing for influence. It's competing for access to the raw materials that underpin energy transitions, defense industries, and technological dominance. Losing Niger's uranium to Russia isn't just a symbolic loss. It's a structural one. NATO-aligned governments are already responding. Sanctions are likely. Asset freezes, diplomatic isolation, pressure on neighboring states to limit Niger's trade routes. But here's the problem. Every punitive measure pushes Niger closer to Moscow. Every sanction proves the junta's argument that the West only engages on its own terms, and those terms are non-negotiable. Russia, by contrast, is offering a transactional relationship with no lectures, no oversight, and no historical baggage. For a government that came to power rejecting French dominance, that's a compelling alternative. Over $300 million in uranium, allegedly now in Russian hands. A supply chain disrupted, a region realigning, and a Western alliance that's discovering the limits of its leverage when a country decides independence is worth the cost. The question isn't whether NATO will retaliate, it will. The question is whether that retaliation will deter other nations watching this unfold, or whether it will accelerate the very realignment NATO is trying to prevent. Because if resource-rich countries across Africa and beyond start concluding that sovereignty requires breaking with the West, this uranium deal won't be remembered as an isolated transaction. It'll be remembered as the moment the old order lost its grip. Niger isn't defending itself in court. It's not issuing statements. It's not negotiating. It's simply acting, moving uranium, reportedly selling it, and ignoring every legal warning NATO throws its way. This silence isn't weakness. It's strategy, and it's forcing a realization across Western capitals. The era of unquestioned control over African resources may already be over. For over half a century, the Sahel operated under a predictable system. Former colonial powers, primarily France, maintained access to strategic resources through a combination of military presence, economic agreements, and institutional leverage. When disputes arose, they were settled in arbitration courts, World Bank chambers, or behind closed doors in Paris. The rules were clear and compliance was expected. Niger's uranium flowed to French reactors. Contracts were honored. The system held. But after the 2023 military coup, that system didn't just weaken, it collapsed. And now, instead of negotiating within the old framework, Niger is building outside of it entirely. On one side, NATO-aligned governments launching investigations, filing lawsuits, issuing warnings through international bodies, legal teams assembling cases, arbitration panels issuing rulings, diplomatic channels demanding accountability. On the other side, silence. Niger's military government isn't engaging. It's not defending its actions in legal forums or justifying the alleged uranium sale in press conferences. It's simply proceeding as if those legal structures no longer apply. And that contrast between NATO's frantic legal activity and Niger's calm defiance is revealing something fundamental. The power to enforce those rules has eroded faster than anyone anticipated. But Niger isn't framing this as a legal dispute. Internally, and increasingly across the region, the narrative is different. The uranium isn't stolen, it's reclaimed. Decades of extraction that enriched Europe, while Niger remained impoverished, aren't being defended as fair trade. They're being reframed as exploitation. And the decision to move that uranium, to sell it on terms Niger controls, isn't seen as a violation of international law. It's seen as an assertion of sovereignty. This rhetorical shift matters because it's not just about Niger. It's about how resource-rich nations across Africa are starting to redefine their relationship with the West. The language of liberation, of correcting historical imbalances, is becoming central to how governments justify breaking with old agreements. Niger's approach is being watched closely. Mali has already moved in a similar direction, expelling French forces and pivoting toward Russia. Burkina Faso has renegotiated mining contracts and limited Western military access. Guinea and Chad are reviewing resource agreements signed decades ago under very different political circumstances. What ties these moves together isn't just anti-French sentiment. It's a fundamental questioning of who controls Africa's resources and under what terms. And Niger's defiance, its willingness to ignore international rulings and sell uranium to Russia despite legal threats, is becoming a model. Not because it's legally sound, but because it's working. The uranium moved. The money reportedly changed hands. And NATO's legal machinery, for all its activity, hasn't reversed any of it. So what happens when legal frameworks lose their enforcement power? When arbitration rulings are ignored, and there's no mechanism to compel compliance beyond sanctions that push countries further into alternative alliances? You'll see why this moment matters, not just for Niger, but for the entire architecture of global resource governance. Because if Niger can redefine sovereignty on its own terms and face retaliation but not reversal, then the precedent is set. Other nations will calculate that the cost of defiance is bearable and the benefit, control over their own resources, is worth it. Right now, NATO is operating as if the old rules still apply, filing cases, issuing rulings, demanding accountability. But Niger is operating as if those rules are already obsolete. And the gap between those two realities is where the future of the Sahel and perhaps the broader global South is being decided. This isn't just a legal standoff. It's a power shift in real time. The question isn't whether Niger will comply, it won't. The question is whether the international order can adapt to nations that no longer recognize its authority, or whether that order will fracture entirely as more countries follow Niger's lead. Because if this is liberation, not theft, if that framing holds, then the uranium sale isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a much larger renegotiation of who controls what and on whose terms.